Hi, we're from the National Association of Alienated Parents. Myself, Andrew John Teague, Peter Davies. This year, 2018, we launched NAAP, the National Association of Alienated Parents, to introduce this educational DVD for schools and contact centres to have a full understanding of what goes on in the background and the forefront with children throughout the UK.
Hi, my name is Peter Davies. I'm one of the directors of NAAP, and we formed back in March. One of the things that we're acutely aware of since forming is that there's a need to improve awareness throughout the general public, and especially amongst professionals working with children and families. One of the main areas that we've discovered is that there's a paucity of information in schools and contact centres, and this is what this video is intended to address.
I'm Woodall. I'm from the Family Separation Clinic in London, where I work with children and families who are affected by divorce and separation. I'm an internationally recognised expert in working with children who reject or refuse to have a relationship with a parent after family separation. And this is one issue which I think is not understood very well and which needs to be more clearly articulated so that those who are working with children can properly recognise and understand and help. If you're working with children who are affected by divorce and separation, you will be aware that there are some who will say things about a parent which may in the end turn out to be untrue. You will be aware that divorce and separation affects children and affects how they behave. It creates great anxiety for some children. But within the overall group of children who are affected by divorce and separation, there's a small group who become very stuck in a particular type of behaviour. This behaviour is a rejection of one parent and a strong alignment to the other. The behaviours that are seen in these children are very clear, and if you understand those behaviours, you are more able to help children in these circumstances. This video is for head teachers and pastoral carers who are working with children of divorce and separation. It is designed to help you to understand those behaviours which are seen in this small group of children who reject a parent. This problem is called parental alienation. You may have heard of the label before, or it may be new to you. This video will help you to deepen what you do know and also introduce you to concepts which you may have not heard about, but which you may well recognise as the video unfolds. One of the biggest difficulties for head teachers or teachers who are working with children of divorce and separation is when a child says that they do not want to see a parent after separation, and they become very clear that they do not want one of their parents to come to any school event or to even be on the school premises. This can often place schools in a very difficult position, and many schools will take the line that they want to keep school a safe place. One of the problems for children of divorce and separation is that if the school, in making these decisions, convey to the children that one parent is acceptable and the other parent is not, the school, even as it tries not to be involved, becomes entangled in the problem. Children need schools to be a place where both of their parents are welcome. The message that this gives to children when schools welcome both parents, even when children are in the defensive position of saying that they do not want to see a parent, is that the message that both parents are important to a child becomes conveyed clearly. Children should not have the right or the responsibility to make a decision to reject one parent and to align with the other. When this is seen, it is a particular maladaptation to the divorce and separation process. What it tells us is that the family as a whole are struggling to make the move from living together to living apart. What it also tells us is that there may be deeper hidden problems in the family, such as one parent deliberately influencing a child and preventing the other parent from having anything to do with that child for reasons which are unseen. Therefore, When you see a child who is in a rejecting position, when you see that they are strongly and adamantly refusing and rejecting a parent, it should be a cause for concern. It should alert you to the fact that there is a deeper hidden problem. The common view of a child who rejects a parent is that that parent must have done something to have caused that rejection in the first place. In reality, in the majority of these cases, the reasons why the child has rejected that parent turn out to be flimsy and weak. Children will say to us that they don't want to see a parent because that parent has made them eat broccoli, for example, or that that parent makes them do their homework. What the children are doing is using an infantile defense mechanism called psychological splitting to resolve the impossible position that they're in. And in doing so, they're taking energy away from the things that they should be involved in, such as learning and playing at school. And therefore, if you become alienation aware, if you become aware of the signs and symptoms that a child displays, and if you realise that there are things that you can do to help that child, then one of the things that you are doing is promoting that child's life chances over the longer term. We currently live in an environment in the UK where the voice of the child is considered to be very important. What you are listening to when you see a child reject a parent is the hidden voice of the child. The child is actually saying, I'm in a situation which is too difficult for me to cope with, and therefore I'm going to reject one parent and align with the other in order to feel comfortable. At school, that child may well appear to do incredibly well at the beginning. But what we see and what research evidence tells us is that as time goes by, that child starts to show the signs of psychological splitting. Splitting is a defense mechanism which no child should be displaying beyond the age of 2 or 3. It creates a belief in the child that there are wholly good things and wholly bad things in the world, that there is no ambivalence, there are no shades of grey. What happens as the child gets older is that they then begin to build relational patterns which uphold this splitting. This means that when they attempt to form peer group relationships, when they go into older, more adult relationships, they start to put people on pedestals and then knock them down very quickly. They cannot hold ambivalent feelings. One of the things that we see in younger children who become psychologically split is that they suffer a great deal of generalised anxiety. Generalised anxiety disorder is a problem that young children find it very difficult to cope with. It causes sleeplessness, it causes agitation, it causes a lack of focus. All of those things really create problems when children are trying to learn. Children who are psychologically split will become unduly involved in adult issues. And as they do, they lose the ability to enjoy unconscious play and learning. And it's that element which for schools becomes the most important thing to think about. A child who is involved in adult issues, who is heard to say that they don't want a parent to be on the school premises, who becomes distressed if dad attends a sports day, or becomes overly keen to make sure that mum isn't allowed on the school premises ever, is actually showing the problem of psychological splitting in a strong way. And schools can help to avoid this. One of the things that schools can do is to have a clear divorce and separation policy, which all parents can be given at the child's entry into school. A clear divorce and separation policy conveys to parents what the school will and will not do if the family separates. A divorce and separation policy should make it clear that the school will communicate directly with both parents and that the school will not uphold the child's rejection. Some teachers find this quite difficult and find that the voice of the child really means following what the child says. But if we're going to really work from the perspective of the voice of the child, What we have to do is to uphold the child's right to a relationship with both parents. And so, in the absence of any clear evidence, and evidence should be that which is conveyed in the court process or that which is seen through the police process, in the absence of any clear evidence that a parent has done something wrong to a child, then that child should be made aware that their rejection will not be upheld by the school. This gives a clear message to the child that both parents are important in their lives and that they can go back to the unconscious work of learning and playing as other children do. We know from our work at the Family Separation Clinic that schools who follow this process and who are very clear with parents about what they will and will not accept on the school premises after divorce and separation are those where children of divorce and separation do very well. Children of divorce and separation do not have to be disadvantaged by divorce and separation, and schools can play a big part in preventing disadvantage from occurring. Schools have almost as much time with the child as the parents do, and in some cases more time. Therefore, they play an integral part in helping a child to maintain a balanced relationship with both parents. The school does not have to be the place where the parental conflict is played out. It doesn't have to be the place where one parent attempts to convince the school that the other parent is dangerous. The school can remain outside of all of the dynamics of divorce and separation by having a clear divorce and separation policy, a clear commitment to ensuring that the flow of information about the child goes to both parents, not just one, putting the other parent at distance. What you will see in this video is information which will help you to understand the problem of parental alienation at a deeper level. What you will hear more of in this video are the ways in which parents attempt to influence schools and the ways in which parents can use schools as a ground for conflict. In understanding these dynamics, you can become more alienation aware and you can protect children from the efforts of parents to use schools in a campaign against the other parent. This information is critically important. This is a hidden problem. It is one which runs throughout our society and which has been normalised and deeply hidden for many years. Many people who we work with immediately recognise the issue when we describe it. They immediately understand that someone in their school or in their family has been affected by it. By watching this video, you can more fully understand the problem and you can learn about what you can do differently that can help children of divorce and separation and protect and improve their life chances over many years to come.
Well, hello, my name is Stuart Hontree. I am an advisor to an organisation called the National Association of Alienating Parents, who have asked me to come in and contribute to an educational DVD that they're preparing for schools to perhaps help schools understand and to increase their awareness of a concept known or phenomenon called parental alienation. Now, parental alienation is a phenomenon where one parent will manipulate their children to reject needlessly a relationship with the other parent. And when we look at parental alienation in clinical terms, it's not just a single mental health problem, it's a series of incremental mental health problems which are likely to develop in the absence of any effective intervention for these type of children. So being able to see and be aware and see how these events progress is extremely important, especially for first instance professionals who get lots of time with these children, such as teachers. And from what we've seen, schools can be key players in parental alienation. They can be key players in progressing it, they can be key players in preventing it. If they have the awareness, they can see it developing and do things that are very useful in stopping the progression of these mental health disorders at whatever stage they may be. But what we see normally is we have 4 types of responses from schools. They can be facilitators. There are 2 types of facilitators. One is the head teacher or the teachers who decide actively to assist one parent in manipulating their children against the other parent. There are those who naively do the same thing. So they're still engaging in the behaviours of ostracising the other parent, normally the non-resident parent. But also there are the schools who are helpless to do, they think they're helpless to do anything positive when in fact they're not. And the 4th type is those who are child-focused, do everything they possibly can to help the child, and with those kind of schools we see far better outcomes for those children very, very much earlier. So I'm going to try and promote the awareness of this kind of phenomenon in schools, because we know that it's a major problem for not just for schools but for the children within those schools, and it's a major disruptor of schools from their core duties of educating children. You know, these kind of children can be not only the children difficult, but the interactions with the professionals are difficult, and the interactions with the parents. And an inordinate amount of time can be spent by professionals within schools doing things that they're not really trained to do, and it really takes them away from their core duties of educating not just that child but other children as well. So probably the first concept that certainly teachers need to be aware of, and head teachers, is a thing called triangulation, where an older person who has some form of control over the children manipulates them into a campaign against somebody else, to support them in a campaign. So the child becomes an active player against somebody else. So the first person to be recruited is the child into this, but also alienating parents will do everything they can to triangulate and recruit other forms of support, mainly from professionals. And it will be every agency that the child is likely to, across whose radar the child is likely to move, such as social services, sometimes the police, certainly the schools, and we'll focus on the schools here, and also trying to manipulate and recruit both sides of the family against what we call a targeted parent, which is the parent that's the controlling parent, which wishes to remove from the child's life. And this process of triangulation was studied by a group of researchers at Plymouth University in 2015, and they found that triangulation itself induces an additional form of stress into children, on top of the stresses of family separation, on top of the stresses of not seeing a parent to whom they were probably securely attached before the family split, and on top of the processes of all the attachment disruption and acute stress disorders that they can suffer. So triangulation had its own form of stress, but because the children had been manipulated into this triangle against a targeted parent, they didn't realise where their stress was actually coming from. So triangulation does actually have its own form of stress that comes with it. The purpose of triangulation is fourfold. The first is to ostracise the targeted parent. The second is to improve and embed the alienating, controlling parent's sole access to their child. The third is to limit anybody else's access so that they're able to stop the child from having any kind of influence from anybody else that may contradict the controlling parents. And so controlling parents will do everything they can to reduce every single agency, service that the child is going through, whose services that the children are likely to pass. And there are two main effects of this on children. The first is the stress that I've already spoken about. The second is the effect of what happens within the child services and how they they now start to interact with the family. Because if the child services are in any way believing the controlling parent and the things that they say about the other parent, especially where there's no evidence in concerned, is they can actually assist the alienating parent to ostracize the other parent from the children and the children from the other parent. And one of the results that can happen here is that in what is often a genuine, sincere attempt to protect children from parents who have had allegations made against them, is that there is a kind of quasi-judicial process that can kick in, and all of the child services may well support the controlling parent in ostracizing the child from the targeted parent by saying maybe it's not safe for this child to see the other parent until the results of investigations are done. The problem with that, of course, is that the controlling parent then has an inordinate amount of time, at least weeks, within which they are isolated from the targeted parent, isolated from any real help, and the controlling parent can then make sure that their influence over the children is so effective that even when the investigations are done and they come back with zero evidence of any wrongdoing by the targeted parent, it then becomes difficult to reunite the child with the targeted parent because they've been coerced, manipulated and psychologically controlled in the meantime. Now obviously schools are a very big part of the process because they are the only neutral environment that a child at this stage is moving in. So if the psychologically controlling parent has to put their child into an independent environment every day for such an extreme length of time, that environment is a threat to the aims and the motives of the psychology of the controlling parent. So what they tend to do is they will try and manipulate the school environment so that it mirrors the home environment and the child doesn't have the impression that they're moving within a neutral place where they can say and do and express themselves as they feel. One of the key strategies that we often see with some of the most determined controlling parents is that they choose to take a role in the school, and because a governing body is being drawn from the parent population of that particular school, there is a possibility that they try to get themselves elected onto the board, and once elected onto the board, onto becoming the chair of governors. You then have a problem whereby the school staff effectively work for the governor. The governor is allowed more time in the school than any other parent presumably would be. They're allowed to walk the corridors. It compromises the neutrality of the school in the child's eyes, and the child realises that they're within an environment that is controlled and that they're controlled by a very powerful influence of their own parent. And also, as a governor, they may actually be able to even further disaffect the perceptions of school staff against the targeted parent. Some school staff, even if they don't agree with what's going on, may feel that they have no choice but to comply for the good of their careers. And things for these type of children can get very, very rough indeed, because it means that they never have any kind of respite from the control that they're under. They're controlled at home, and their environment at school is very much controlled as well. So in order to understand parental alienation, you need first to have at least a basic knowledge of a thing called attachment. And attachment is the neurobiological system that is hardwired within us that enabled us to bond very closely with our carers. So providing carers are empathic and they look after our needs, and there's a reciprocal dance where a child needs something and it's provided for by the parent, an attachment and a secure bond will develop between the carer, parent and the child. And the child's emotional regulation is very largely dependent on the availability of their secure attachments. So if one of their secure attachments is missing after a family separation, the chances are that the child will be very stressed. And I'm sure you've seen it as teachers, where you understand that there's been a family separation and the behaviour and the presentation of the children within that family suddenly changes. They become anxious, they become less resilient, and what this is that because they're missing one of their secure attachments, they are the stress responses of their attachment system are starting to kick in. And these children are suffering from acute stress disorders, adjustment disorders, and separation anxieties. And whilst they're in this particular state, it's very difficult for them to function properly. Now, all of our higher end cognitive functions, such as empathy, morality, our response regulation, our ability to modulate our fears and to unlearn our fears, all depend upon the foundation and maintaining of a secure attachment. And as soon as our attachments are disrupted, these are the kind of higher end cognitive functions which start to be compromised. And if a child is at the same time undergoing, at the same time as these disorders which are associated with attachment and the neurological diminishing of these higher end functions, it makes them less likely and less able, less resilient to withstand behaviours of psychological control. So these children are far easier to coerce, far easier to manipulate. And if they are being manipulated against the other parent, you will probably see that as teachers in the way that these children speak about the other parent. Now, in the early stages of attachment disruption, you may understand that the children are very happy to be with the other parent, so it's best to be guided by the child's behaviours rather than their expressions. If you see that if the other parent is coming into the school and the child is happily interacting with them at the beginning of this process, then the chances are that they have a good relationship with that targeted parent before the family separation, or even in a family that is long since been separated, but something has triggered off the what we call the alienating behaviours from the controlling parent. So there may be various points that the behaviours can be alienating strategies and behaviours can trigger within an alienating parent. For some, it's the point of family separation. For some, it's beforehand. But some may actually have been separated for some years and shared the care of their children without any problems at all. And then suddenly something triggers off the alienating strategies. The most common one being that the other parent finds a new partner, and a controlling parent is upset, anxious, worried, scared of allowing their child time with a new partner who they don't know. And there are other triggers as well for these behaviours to start. And you'll see changes in children who beforehand would have been happy to go to both parents. You may now see and hear expressions from children saying that that they're not as keen to see the other parent as they previously were. However, although the children may say this, if the other parent collects them from school, the children are happy to go with them. So I'd be guided more by the behaviours of children than what they have to say. Now, as I said, the controlling parent needs to undermine the neutrality of the school environment in the child's eyes. And if they can make the school an extension of the environment that the child moves in at home, then the child is likely to continue behaving in a way which suits the controlling parent. And it's very important at this stage that schools understand that they must maintain the school as a neutral environment for the child. The child must be told that this is an environment for their learning. It is not an environment within which their parents are supposed to be taking control and taking effect. The neutrality of schools is an absolute key point, because there are very few other environments that are available in the assessment processes that may now come into play where children can go. And if the environment that children normally move in at school is a comfortable one and is neutral and where they feel supported, then the interviews and assessments which can be done at school are likely to be far more effective and less damaging and, frankly, less abusive to children than they may otherwise could be. And one of the key ways that schools can maintain their independence is to understand that there is a chance that their good offices can be manipulated, and manipulated in a way that disadvantages the child's relationship to the other parent and disadvantages the other parent's relationship to the school. The first thing that happens, from what we see quite often, is that the staff get manipulated. The head teachers have probably seen all this before. So what could happen is that the controlling parent might start a little bit further down the hierarchy, especially at the reception level, where receptionists may not be as well trained as head parents and more senior teachers, may not have seen this sort of stuff before, and they may not actually be involved in everyday long interactions with children, so they don't understand that there's an administrative role rather than a child face-to-face kind of role. And what can happen is that although they're in the administrative side, that actually gives the controlling parent an immense opportunity to cut out the targeted parent from being involved with the school. Because if you can hit the school at the administrative level with somebody who's not trained and not often around children, not seen this kind of problem before, that is a key vulnerability in the school where processes can be manipulated against the other parent quite naively. And sometimes they actually, school receptionist staff can be asked to do things that they actually feel are the right things to do, but actually are undermining the school's obligations to ensure that both parents are involved in the upbringing of the children, and actually these moves against the targeted parent can be very detrimental to the mental health of the children and actually worsen the position that they're in, worsen the disorders that these children suffer, worsen their presentation at school, and make life for the child and the school a great deal harder. So there is a need to be watchful for these kind of behaviours, because once they start to build and once they take hold, they can be very, very difficult to stop. If an alienating, controlling parent sees that their attempts to undermine the school are initially successful, the chances are that the strategies that they use and their attempted involvement of the school to continue these behaviours will become a long-term problem and make life very much harder for the children. And it's very difficult to see which parents are saying things because they are genuinely concerned and which parents are not. But you'll have overt and covert conversations with school reception staff, other teachers in the playground who become friendly with parents. And one of the key areas that we see is that controlling parents attempt to persuade the administrative school or the head teachers to prevent the interaction and the engagement of the targeted parent with school events, especially school choir events, school sports days, this sort of thing. They'll try and manipulate the school into believing that for instance, if they're going through a court process, an alienating parent might say that the other parent is not allowed to attend any of these events or parents' evenings because it doesn't say so on the court order. Well, in fact, court orders work the other way. They only prohibit or stop anybody from doing something. So if those specific measures have not been reflected on a court order that's shown to you, then that's for them to say that they're not allowed to do something because it's not a court order, that's a misrepresentation of the legal process, and it's a common way that we see where schools are manipulated by controlling parents. Another, what we call a classic trick that is sometimes played by alienating parents, is where they coerce a child to make allegations against the targeted parent which could be made outside of school, and the alienated parent could themselves directly contact the local social services. What happens instead is that the child makes these allegations at school, The school then has a duty to inform the local social services, and if the allegations are severe enough, automatically there's a Section 47 investigation kicks in, and it seems to have far more valence because it comes from the school rather than comes from the alienating parent directly. The alienating parent may already have a track record with the social services where this kind of thing has happened before and the allegations have been dismissed. So there could be any one of a number or a series of Section 47 investigations in the past. But we find that the ones that are actually initiated from a report from a school where a child has been placed into the school, made the allegations, and the school has then gone further with it, they are the ones where often the social services will instruct or advise the alienating parent to stop all contact with the targeted parent for a specific period of time whilst the allegations are investigated. And the allegations, obviously, because they're made at school, they involve processes at schools as well. And because these allegations in many cases are not true, the child has been manipulated, coerced to make them at school, it can ruin the child's perception of the school as a neutral environment, because the child sees the school as a collaborator in them now not seeing their targeted parent for X amount of weeks. So one of the key things that schools can do is to ensure that they themselves as an institution maintain a positive, active relationship with the other parent, with the targeted parent. These parents often disengage at some stage during this process, whether it be legal process or not, and very much of their decision making about whether they remain engaged with their children will rely upon whether professionals are triangulated into a campaign against them and whether professionals actively engage in isolating their children from them. It is an extreme stressor for a targeted parent to be isolated from their own children for no good reason whatsoever, with the help of the instruments of state, such as schools, courts, social services, and other agencies through which the children move. So I would advise any school to maintain, without any compromise, as far as possible, a neutral environment where they are involved with both parents in the absence of actual findings and proven abuse or evidence that the targeted parent should not be near the child. And sometimes this may actually involve taking an active role, because many targeted parents simply, after experience with some child services where they have been ostracised, they may have the impression that all services will ostracise them. So if there are school events, I would suggest it would be a good move, if you have the address or whatnot of the other parent, to invite them to school events. It may mean that you have to keep the two parents separate at the events. You might have to monitor the degree of stress that it could induce in a child in having both parents, and also monitor for any controlling behaviour by either one of the parents, attempts to control it within this kind of environment where there are school events, because that can obviously be very stressful for the children as well. It could mean some interaction with the children beforehand, so as to tell the children that the school is a completely neutral place, daddy will be on one side, mummy's on the other, they're not going to talk to each other, you can carry on as you would normally do. So it's very important for schools not to be persuaded by parents who are using controlling strategies to try and isolate another parent from the child's life. Now, these kind of parents can be extremely persuasive. They can be quite obstructive, rude, obnoxious when they don't get their way, but I would suggest that you don't take the easy route, don't try and get an easy life for yourselves by simply aligning with one parent against the other. That you maintain that neutrality, be robust, and I'd suggest that you be there for both of the parents, because if you're there for both of the parents, you are there for the whole of the child. One of the best things that schools are able to do is actually facilitate parenting time for the ostracised parent. It's a safe environment. It's an environment where many children are quite accustomed to seeing both of their parents until one of these trigger points arrives in their lives, and children may be quite happy to see the ostracised parent at the school. It would also reinforce to the children that the school is actually a neutral place. So rather than the psychologically controlling effects of one parent following the child all day at school, by being neutral and by allowing a targeted parent in to have contact, where you actually take a child out of a class and give them some time with the targeted parent, and do it proactively without court orders, obviously without disrupting the child's education too much. But you'll find that in some of the schools that have done this, alienated parents can sometimes give up, because if they can't compromise the environments in which the children move when they're not in the family home, they simply don't have the ability to isolate the children to the degree that is necessary to fully manipulate, fully alienate them, or fully induce delusional disorders and brainwashing into the children. So it would be a protective factor for the school, where the targeted parent is safe, to facilitate as much time, as much involvement with the child and the targeted parent at school. Now, you may find that certainly later on in the timelines where social services can get involved, one of the attempts, one of the supposed resolutions that the social services try to bring in, is counselling and therapeutic services for the child. There's a problem here, because really there's nothing wrong with the child. Children are reacting quite naturally and normally, and as can be expected, to the circumstances that are being imposed upon them. So it's not necessarily the children who need the intervention, it's the parents who need the intervention. Now, when I say parents, there's an S on the end of parents, but it's not, in these kind of scenarios, it's not parents, it's one parent acting in ways which are designed to ostracise the other parent, and those behaviours are seen, noted and felt very deeply by the child and have an effect on the child. So the real therapy that children need is for both of their parents to support a proper parenting plan between them that satisfies the child's attachment needs. And if there's a secure attachment to both parents, which is more or less equal, then obviously you would expect to see a parenting plan that reflects an equal enough division of time between the two parents. And where you don't get that, you're likely to see the problems manifest in children where their attachment systems are disrupted. So attachment systems are still likely to be disrupted, even in cases where a child is seeing the other parent, but not having enough time with them to satisfy the degree of disruption that they're feeling at the separation. So sometimes the social services will suggest that the child goes through counselling or therapeutic services, and that these services are administered at the school. So the problem there is that if these interventionists are not trained in what's called family systems, which is the psychological division under which the best research has been done for children going through these particular problems, if the counsellors and therapists are not trained in this particular type of assessment and intervention, there is a possibility that they can actually do more harm. The traditional one-on-one therapy with children of this type really doesn't work. Even if you identify what the problem is and try to help the children, whatever good is done in therapy tends to be undone when the children go back to the psychologically controlling parent. So you need to be very careful that the type of counselling and therapy that is undertaken by or is recommended by social services to be done in schools for children who may be having these kind of problems, we must ensure that that kind of therapy is exactly the right one, and that the therapist is trained in family systems. So again, just to summarise, from what we've seen, there are 4 types of behaviours and scenarios that we can get from school in response to these type of events when once they start to kick off, where the psychological manipulation of children by one parent against another parent start to manifest within the school environment. So the first one is that the school become active collaborators and facilitators of the alienation process. That may be more the case where the controlling parent has managed to get themselves a position of influence on the board of governors. The second type of school is where they actively promote the alienation without realising that what they're doing is actually wrong, without realising what they're doing is against the child's best interests, where they have become triangulated innocently and they believe perhaps the allegations against the other parent, they believe some of the adverse expressions that children come up with against a targeted parent, where they haven't seen any positive interaction between the child and the targeted parent because perhaps the targeted parent no longer comes to the school or is no longer feels welcome. So you get the deliberate and you get the naive facilitators of alienation within the school population. You get a third type where the school staff, even right up to headmistress level, head teacher level, may not realise that there are things that they can do to assist the child. They may not agree with the alienating parent strategies, and they may be quite aware of what is actually going on. They may be very well informed about parental alienation, but they feel helpless. Schools have only got limited resources, and these children can burn up an inordinate amount of resources. It's additional interactions with parents, both parents, additional interactions with social services, therapeutic services, with those particular children, and where some of these children are concerned, they do start to manifest with some very disruptive behaviours. Some of them are diagnosed, which brings its own problems, and some of them are misdiagnosed and actually put into classes where it's believed they've got ADHD or autism because the symptom set is pretty much the same. So the amount of administration that these children can cause can be quite high for a busy school. A busy school with 1,000 kids or so is now overly focused on what could be a very small, many resources and a lot of time now being spent on what could be a small sample of the school. It's very disruptive to teachers' time and very disruptive to the running of the school and taking the school away from their core educational purpose. And the fourth type of the school that I would suggest is to be as child-focused as possible from the beginning, where perhaps even preventative measures and awareness courses are run within the school and proactive literature sent out to parents that the following will not be accepted for our population of children is unacceptable behaviour from parents. So try to nip it in the bud before it even starts. Make it very clear to potential psychological controllers, and you never know who they may be, because the most sane, nicest person can turn into a complete monster of a parent and engage in these kind of behaviours where their triggers and where their buttons are pressed. We're all vulnerable to moving along the scale one way or the other, and you really never know which kind of parent is going to be or when this could happen. And where these alienation scenarios seem to be coming along, seem to be in place, remain robust. Make it very clear to both parents, as robustly as you can, as often as you need to, that the school is and must and will remain a neutral environment, and that the school is there to support the child. And if you do that, the chances are that the acceleration of many of these alienation cases will be arrested, and if we're really lucky, the incidence of parental alienation may actually be reduced, because controlling parents will know that they're unlikely or unable to use schools as a conduit to further their own aims rather than the best interests of their kids. And I'd advise that schools be very watchful for these sort of scenarios when they arrive, and perhaps even have a list of somebody who you trust as experts, who works with alienated children, perhaps bring somebody in to instruct the school, or perhaps even bring them in unilaterally in cases where you think this sort of thing is going on. Because if you can nip it in the bud and you can arrest the progression and development of parental alienation, you will have far better outcomes for the children. And we also know that children that have two parents in their lives, have far better educational outcomes. Thanks a lot.